What's happening, folks? Back with another reaction. Back with a soundtrack I have reacted to before, but not as much as one might think, given that I've done an entire watch-along of the full series on my Patreon, and I'm talking about the Death Note anime from way back in 2006. Though, as I've talked about, and one tune of which I've reacted to, there's also a soundtrack for the excellent 2015 live-action version of the story, and I will watch that on my Patreon at some point, but yes, we're going back to the 2006 anime, and we're going to listen to one of the tracks composed by Yoshihisa Hirano. Again, the original soundtrack has two different composers, and I believe this one is done by Yoshihisa Hirano. And the tune is called Low of Solipsism. I'm not quite sure what to make of the title. Solipsism, the idea that we're all just sort of in these islands of our own brains and we can't really know anything for sure out there. And a low of solipsism might refer to the inability to determine what's really happening or to penetrate someone else's mind. And fair to say, in the anime and based on the manga, that we get a lot of internal monologues and speculating about what someone else in the same scene might know or might think about the person who is narrating in that regard. So there is a lot of internal versus external understanding, but that's just a supposition, and there's no proper lyrics in English or in Japanese. Now, that being said, it is a piece with chant, like vocal, almost like Gregorian-style chant, and maybe there are actually lyrics there, but I've always heard those vocals as atmospheric and melodic more than conveying any specific words, so maybe I'm wrong about that. Either way, it's a tune that is used in some dramatic moments, most notably at the very beginning of the show when Light starts really using the Death Note, meaning he finds the Death Note early on, he's not quite sure about it, he thinks it's, maybe just something to toss away, but he ends up taking it home. Eventually he writes a name in a book just as on a lark, on a whim. It seems to actually kill someone. He uses it a few more times and becomes convinced that it's actually real, and he can cause someone's death by just writing their name and thinking of their face. And then he really dives into it and begins to take on these grand designs that are perhaps, maybe not delusions of grandeur, but megalomaniacal ideas about how he can become a god of the new world that he would create by culling those he deems as morally imperfect and so on. And the first moment when he really begins writing a lot of names in the book and starts expressing this idea that I was destined to find this and only I could use this book in this way, this tune plays, and it really suggests like, oh wow, we're headed towards some crazy times. Now, I think it's literally the first episode, so the degree to which you're headed toward crazy times in that episode is not yet clear, or is still far to be expanded at that moment. But it is a very notable and memorable moment in the show. Let's hear the track. This is from, is it Yoshihisa? Let me check one more time. Yeah, Yoshihisa Hirano, and the tune is Low of Solipsism from the 2006 anime version of Death Note. powerful, evocative. It draws from some different other tracks in the soundtrack, meaning there's a bit of the Kyrie feeling in this one, but there's also a bit of that almost Carl Orff style dramatic choral delivery. There's some strings, I think both cellos and violins, and then there's that tension string in the latter stages, and there's that, I don't even know what instrument conveys it, but that like that you got that, hair rising on the back of your neck. Suddenly you're thinking there's something afoot that maybe you weren't prepared for, or maybe there's something that's about to unravel or to reveal itself in a dangerous way. And there's a particular sonic moment where that creepiness, that uncertainty, I think, is conveyed in over the course of just a couple seconds. And yes, there's many moments it makes me think of, but in particular that first episode section where Light really begins to embrace his role as a human Shinigami, meaning a human god of death. So again, if you've seen the show or read the manga, you know how epic the story is. Fair to say, again, when I finished the anime, I was thinking, yeah, I think the ending, and most of the parts along the way are almost identical. That is true, but the ending, maybe more than anything else, is actually a bit different in the anime than the manga. It ends up roughly in the same place, but the way the final scene unfolds, there are some notable differences. So perhaps at some point, as I talked about on my Patreon, I'm going to go back and watch some of the behind the scenes like bonus footage where they talk to the writer, they talk to the people who did the voice cast, I think both in Japanese and the English language voice cast when it was recorded by Ocean Studios. And when I do that, perhaps I'll talk a bit more about the differences between the anime ending and the manga ending, even if they are quite close. And to be fair, even if they are somewhat different, those endings are indeed much closer than the ending of the 2015 live-action J-drama or the mid-2000s, late 2000s live-action movies that were shot, which all take very different narrative choices along the way, and especially at the end. So, as I said, maybe I'll talk a bit more about that, though still being careful not to have any spoilers, because as I said, I plan on watching at the very least the 2015 live-action show on my Patreon, maybe the live-action movies at some point too. So yeah, like I said, if you're familiar with the show, you know how crazy it is. There's 26 tracks or something, 24 tracks on the original soundtrack, and then there was a second soundtrack for the anime that came out later. I only have the first one, but having said that, I think I've reacted to 4, maybe 5 tunes from it, so many more to go that we can listen to. Do let me know what you think of this, and Luca and I will see you next time, and who knows, maybe Ryuk will show up behind us. Peace.